All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, the second in a series of events that we're hosting in partnership with the Council on Foundations and Hispanics in Philanthropy with the Department of Education. We are glad you could join us today. We've got a great conversation about raising the bar, creating student pathways for global engagement. For those of you who've just joined us, feel free to put your name and your affiliation in the chat so we know who's joining us today. My name is Olka Joshi-Hansen. I'm co-interim executive director at Grantmakers for Education and the chief program officer. We are excited about this series that we are hosting with the Department of Education. It's an opportunity for our members and other funders to have an opportunity to hear about the current secretary and the current administration's priorities across a range of areas in education, post-secondary and career pathways, K-12 education, educator workforce issues. And so we're excited to jump in today. We've got two guests with us. We have Dr. Amy Lloyd and Luke Ryan, who are the Assistant Secretary and the Deputy Assistant Secretary, respectively, at the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the Department of Education. Just in terms of flow, we're going to start off with having Dr. Lloyd and Luke present, and then we're going to have time for kind of discussion and Q&A. For those of you on the webinar, we really encourage you to drop questions in the chat as we're presenting, and we will kind of loop those up and bring you into the conversation as much as we can. So without further delay, I'm really pleased to welcome Luke Ryan. Thanks, Luke.
Totally. Hey, happy Monday, everyone. I hope everyone is having a lovely day. And just, two things. So first, it's an absolute pleasure to spend time with you today. As Olka mentioned, my name is Luke Ryan. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. If you're not familiar with OCTE, there are four main policy areas that we spend time prioritizing. The first is career and technical education. The second is adult education and family literacy. The third area is correctional education, and the fourth area is community and technical colleges. I joined the Biden-Harris administration in July of 2022. And immediately before this post, I was the Assistant Secretary for Workforce Support with the Delaware Department of Education. So I've had the opportunity to meet with many of you in my prior role. And in Delaware, I oversaw the state CTE system, this Office of Higher Education, Educator Preparation, and then Educator Licensure and Certification. So in terms of our time today, we are going to kind of go through a couple different slides, and we're going to talk about the Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative. We'll also talk about the Unlocking Career Success initiative, which is embedded within the broader Raise the Bar campaign. And then, as Olka mentioned, please feel free to type in questions, different things like that as I go through the slides. I'm happy to take those on the fly, and more than anything, I'd love to encourage your voice as we go through today's presentation so that this is a little bit more interactive. Again, as Olka mentioned, there will be time at the end for facilitated Q&A as well. All right, so to jump in, we can jump to the next slide. So the first thing, I really just want to frame it with the secretary. And I know that Secretary Cardona has had the opportunity to interact with this group previously. The first thing that I would say, Secretary Cardona, he's amazing to work for, and he is an educator. He is someone who thinks about students first, and he thinks about the trajectory and life experiences that he wants students to have. And in doing so, he has really kind of crafted the Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative as the way in which he sees K-12 systems being responsive to the communities and the economies that we have that we represent, that we are responding to. And he wants to make sure that every young person is positioned for a family-sustaining wage and career beyond their high school experience. So to do so, we'll talk through, again, the raise the bar, lead the world component, and then one of the strategies within that, unlocking career success. So we can jump to the next slide, Vikram. So in the Secretary's Raise the Bar campaign, there are kind of 3 overarching objectives and then 6 strategies. So within each objective, there are 2 strategies. So the first overarching objective is academic excellence. And the 2 strategies that fall within that pillar are around the acceleration of student learning and creating a more comprehensive and rigorous education system for every student. The second strategy is boldly improving learning conditions, and the 2 areas underneath are ensuring that every student has access to an excellent educator. And then the 4th area is investing in student social and emotional learning, as well as mental health and supports. And then the 3rd area is positioning students for global success. And again, we're going to spend the bulk of our time today talking through our career pathway strategy, unlocking career success, but also kind of very notable within this global engagement pillar is also ensuring that we prioritize and value language. Language is both a cultural and career skill, and we think these 2 strategies, career pathways / multilingualism, are ways in which that we can position youth for success beyond high school. All right, we can jump to the next slide. And in terms of why we're prioritizing career pathways, here are just a handful of kind of bullets and backdrop that I'm not going to read to you. I'll just kind of give some quick voice over them. But I would say really 3 things. The first is the world has changed, and we need to ensure that our education system is responsive to both the social and economic conditions that our students need to find success in high school and beyond. And it is important that we continue to think about high school as a way in which we can accelerate students' journey beyond the institution. The second area that I would highlight is through the bipartisan infrastructure law, through the CHIPS and Science Act, through the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a little over $1.8 trillion that's rolling out to states to support education and workforce development. The bipartisan infrastructure law is a $1.2 trillion spending package. CHIPS and Science Act releases about $380 billion to support semiconductor production in the United States. And then within the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a little over $270 billion that states will have access to in terms of support for clean energy, transportation, and other types of things. These investments will bring millions of good jobs across the country, and they will create opportunities for individuals who are differently credentialed to enter the workforce. So as a result, it's incredibly important that we as policymakers, we as community members, we as a community of learners ensure that every young person has a pathway to a good job and can take advantage of these historic investments. And to do so, we want to make sure that young people are equipped with the credentials and skills that they need to both transition into higher levels of education, as well as to directly enter the workforce. All right, we can jump to the next slide. So if you're not familiar with our Unlocking Career Success website, I just wanted to make sure that you had a little bit of a screenshot so that you could see it up front. On the website, we are really focused on stakeholders and the impact that different people can have on our education and employment system. So you'll see a number of things on the website. You'll see a description of really the presentation that I'm going to walk through today. You'll see that through both the About section and our pillars. You'll also see champions. So this is a joint effort across the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Labor. You'll also see work to take action. And we've prioritized, different influencers and people within our education to employment system that are essential. So you'll see folks like counselors and teachers. You'll see folks like school administrators and superintendents. You'll also see individuals like governors and state boards of education, local boards of education, mayors, and other actors that focus really at that intersection of policy and community. But again, I'll also kind of end today's presentation with a QR code that will directly take you to the website. But it is at the top right, just cte.ed.gov is the main site, and Unlocking Career Success falls underneath that. All right, let's jump into the initiative. So within the initiative, there are really 4 areas of focus that we're seeking to prioritize and kind of to join from a policy perspective. And we think these 4 areas are kind of opportunity multipliers for young people as they work through high school graduation. The first is dual enrollment. And our priority for dual enrollment is to ensure that students have both academic and technical credit necessary to facilitate and transition into higher levels of education. And higher levels of education includes enrollment in a 2-year and 4-year system. It includes enrollment in credential programs. It also includes direct enrollment and alignment with registered apprenticeship as both an earning and learning vehicle. But the focus on academic and career-connected coursework, particularly through dual enrollment, is a way in which we can help to also eliminate some of the other barriers that have historically plagued students from transition and finding success as they transition into higher levels of education. The second area is around work-based learning, and this is really focused on partnerships, paid partnerships with employers and other community-based organizations to support the young person to both develop and apply the knowledge and skills that they have and that they have garnered. Work-based learning is really a gift that we can give young people in terms of building their professional networks, as well as experience in an industry in which they want to kind of invest in and kind of is foundational to their future career. So work-based learning and dual enrollment are 2 areas that we see running kind of side by side, both in the development of knowledge and experience, but also in the application of knowledge and experience and helping to set an established trajectory for young people. The third area is around workforce credentials. And this is making sure that we support young people to earn credentials while in high school that are reflective of the knowledge and skills that employers need and are seeking. So our hope within the workforce credentials space is to create access or points of opportunity for young people to earn credentials in industries like IT or healthcare or construction, industries that are growing, that have needs both at the state and local level in terms of economic development, and to position young people with these credentials so that they can both use the credential to reduce their time towards a stackable credential or 2-year or 4-year degree, but also ensure that these credentials help young people to enter the labor market at competitive wages so that they can support themselves beyond high school. And then the fourth area is around career advisement and navigation. And this is really focused around a multi-tiered system of supports. So making sure that young people have access to just a caring adult who can give them a high five in the hallway while in school when they just need someone to talk to and someone to have just a quick conversation with. This is also around coordinating supports for students who may need additional support. So we're thinking about things like the alignment of IDEA and vocational rehabilitation programs for students with disabilities alongside our career pathway programs. So again, the fourth area is really framed as a multi-tiered system of supports to ensure that every young person has the support system and infrastructure that they need to find success in high school and beyond high school. Now, our hope from a policy perspective is to position these things as equal and complementary to one another. So it's the combination of these 4 things that we think is really essential and that we think is necessary to ensure that all young people have a much more direct trajectory into post-secondary education and their workforce. All right, we will jump to the next slide. And to accomplish kind of these 4 policy objectives, there are really 4 ways that we are kind of working to lead the charge. So the first is through a set of practical tools and playbooks. So right now, we are in development of what will be kind of a policy playbook for the different actors and different practitioners that were named earlier when I talked about the website. So, the secretary's charge and vision here is very clear. Kind of college and career pathways and best practices exist across this country. They exist in red and blue states. They exist in red and blue cities. They exist in many different communities. But what we have the ability to do is learn from each other's work product and ensure that we are replicating best practices. So the way that we are envisioning this is a very specific set of tools and resources that folks like governors could use to essentially think about the alignment of their education and workforce systems that take place in their state. The same would be true for mayors. The same would be true for local superintendents and principals, as well as teachers and counselors, as well as community-based organizations, ways in which we can contribute and bridge in-school and out-of-school learning opportunities. So we're really excited about the opportunity and the potential conversations that will happen as a result of the playbook and really helping to showcase the best practices that exist across our country so that collectively we can take advantage of others' work and their learning and to make sure that those best practices are replicated in the best way possible. The secondary idea is really grounding our work in communities of practice. So to this point, we have established 2 communities of practice. The first is with several large urban LEAs. The second is with several rural LEAs. And we want to make sure that we are kind of grounding both our work and our policy ideas in the lived experience and practice of educators across the country. And we also think there's tremendous opportunity for different stakeholders to learn from each other's work and to model from each other's leadership. So our 2 community of practices are really focused around building capacity, ensuring that we remain proximate to the individuals that we seek to serve, and to really leverage the best practices that these exemplary locations and also locations that are in development and are learning, we can kind of really leverage that experience to put the right supports in place for practitioners and to make sure that we're leading with fidelity. The third area, and we're really excited to partner with the Aspen Institute on this project, is a series of regional summits that will help to lift best practices, that will help to create a convening opportunity. So we're excited. Later this summer, we will launch a series of regional summits that will carry through the fall that will help to bring together education and workforce policymakers and practitioners in given states. And we see this as an opportunity to both showcase these regional best practices and exemplars, but also a way where we can equip education and workforce leaders with information that they need to be responsive and effective in terms of the evolution of their career and college pathway system, and also how they align education, workforce, and economic development efforts. So this will be a great opportunity to bring together policymakers and leaders within our field to hear from there are 3 partnering sister agencies at the federal level who are supporting this effort. So first, the Department of Transportation, which will provide some support and infrastructure around the bipartisan infrastructure law. The second is the Department of Commerce, which will really speak to the CHIPS and Science Act. We're also partnering with the Department of Energy, particularly around the Inflation Reduction Act and the clean energy components of that legislation, as well as the Department of Labor, so that we're, again, collectively joining our youth workforce strategies across all of these organizations and all of these different sister agencies. The fourth area is we were very excited in the 23 omnibus. There was a $25 million appropriation to support a career-connected high school grant program. This program will essentially be rolled out under the Perkins Innovation and Modernization program nationally. So there are a couple things that this program seeks to accomplish. So the first is we really want to invest in local education agencies and partnerships across local education agencies, post-secondary institutions, and with employer networks to really scale the 4 pillars that were described on the previous slide. So dual enrollment in combination with paid work-based learning, credential attainment, and college and career advisement and navigation. We think this is an opportunity to make strategic investments across the country to build on the best practices of both leading and learning institutions and communities. In terms of next steps with the Career Connected High School Grant Program, there will be 2 that you should keep an eye out. So the first is the program does require us to make a certain set of rules. So the first thing that will occur is the department will issue a notice of proposed priority, which is a rulemaking process to describe the program. The NPP for Career Connected High Schools should come out very shortly. And so it should come out this month. Essentially, that will then be open for a 30-day public comment period. So this is a wonderful opportunity for this group to think about how we can collectively make investments across the communities that we serve, and that we welcome kind of your ideas and thoughts in terms of the public comment process. The second thing then that would be released is a notice inviting applications, where we would essentially be launching the competition that will occur later this year. So we are excited about both opportunities to ensure that we can both collect your input and we can strategically support the communities and states that you represent and serve. So again, the way that we're thinking about these 4 items is really a complementary set of services. So ensuring that we showcase and lead with best practices and exemplars and actionable steps that different policymakers and leaders can take, that we continue to be proximate to the communities that we want to serve and to invite strategic input and consultation across these different communities, to bring together a broader set of policy leaders and stakeholders to position people with knowledge, relationships, and the experience that they need to move policy, kind of shared policy forward in terms of our education and workforce system, and then some financial support to make these ideas a reality and to invest in best practices that are occurring across our country. All right, let's jump to our next slide. All right, so I'm going to pause just here for a quick moment. One of the programs that is available right now today is our Career Z Challenge. And this is a challenge competition where we're inviting school systems, post-secondary institutions, and community-based organizations and nonprofits that support work-based learning programs in high schools to really think about how we can create a community of practice and how we can build work-based learning ecosystems that dramatically increase the number of young people who have access to work-based learning experiences. So the Career Z Challenge is live on challenge.gov. I think applications are due at the beginning of June, and we did just adjust the eligibility criteria to ensure that community-based organizations and nonprofits who support and work alongside school systems are eligible along with school systems to be the lead on this particular challenge program. The challenge program itself is a $2.5 million competition, and it really is a phased competition. So with this initial phase, or phase 1, we hope to recruit 100 communities across the country who are part of this initial cohort and kind of our learning community. They will work together and compete for phase 2 of the competition. And in each phase, school systems and their partners will receive dedicated technical assistance as well as financial resources to kind of move from phase 1 to phase 2, to do so strategically and to continue to leverage other resources and investments that are available to them through both federal, state, and local funding. All right, so if you have any interest in the Career Z Challenge, I would encourage you to go to challenge.gov. This is a live competition today, and then we're excited to really kind of identify and support, the 100 communities across the country that this grant program seeks to equip. Let's jump to the next slide. Some of the other things that I would just kind of draw your attention to are really on our work to date slide. And again, I'll just kind of give a minute for you to kind of look over this slide itself. There are a handful of things that I'll point out just in terms of items that I would draw your attention to. But there are a number of really neat things that have occurred really from November of last year to this point today. The first, I would really just kind of highlight and emphasize the guidance that the department released through Dear Colleagues and others around the strategic use of ARP funds to support the 4 keys to unlocking career success that we talked about earlier. So again, many school systems across our country are at different rates of spending in terms of their ARP funds. And this is an opportunity to invest these resources strategically to expand or scale dual enrollment, to create or expand work-based learning programs, as well as ways in which we embed credentials within existing college and career pathways, as well as student advisement. So within that Dear Colleague letter, there are a number of best practices that are sourced from across the country to ensure that, again, we're really elevating innovation and making sure that other local education agencies particularly can adopt and discern kind of that information directly. Again, I would also we'll talk about the website in a minute, so I'll leave that there. The other thing that I would point out are the program memo and the Dear Colleague letter around how Perkins can be used to support and align with registered apprenticeship programs. So one of the questions that we often get is around how local education agencies and communities can support what is essentially youth registered apprenticeship. And one of the ways that we think communities can support registered apprenticeship is through the use and application and alignment of Perkins funds that are available federally to states and then from states to local education agencies and other eligible recipients. So this is, again, one way that localities and states can align federal funds to kind of connect education and workforce development efforts. And then the other highlight is the Dear Colleague, again, that encourages the use of Perkins funds to support grow your own models and other forms of teacher residency or teacher apprenticeship models to kind of support and bolster our nation's educator workforce. There are many different examples of states and localities leading the way in terms of grow your own models. And I think this is, again, one way in which federal funds can be used to support those efforts, both in career and technical education, as well as in other academic subject areas where there are shortages in our educator kind of talent pipelines. So I would highlight kind of those 3/4-ish items for your consideration. But again, I think you'll have access to the presentation. All of these resources are linked. So you can certainly kind of follow through any of the links that you have additional interest in. All right. So that. All right. So the last slide really talks through then and provides a QR code for the Unlocking Career Success website. The website itself is pretty neat. So again, there's opportunities on the website to both pull information that you have interest in, as well as provide feedback in areas where you'd like to offer guidance or counsel or offer exemplars. So the website is meant both as a repository of information, as a resource and a repository of best practices, but it's also meant as a way in which we can engage the field to kind of surface best practices and ideas, as well as to seek your input on the work that is rolling out that we just kind of talked through. So with that, I think I'm turning it back over to Olka, and happy to jump in with questions. But I would just say, again, thank you very much for the time and opportunity to speak with you today. So appreciate your support, also appreciate your questions, and just look forward to next steps as we go forward in our conversation.
Thanks, Luke. That was super helpful. And I know that Amy is on her way. So I have a few questions to kind of jumpstart you, but I do want to remind folks in the audience, the reason for these briefings is really an opportunity for you as funders to hear about the Department of Education's agenda across a lot of different areas and to be in dialogue about how funders can help to advance this. And so we'd really love to get your questions in the chat so that we can make sure that we're talking to and answering the things that are most specifically relevant to you. Amy, welcome. I'm sorry there were some technical difficulties there, but we're glad to have you here. And right at the right moment. You probably didn't need to be walked through all the slides, but looking forward to the conversation with you and Luke. Before I start us off with a discussion, was there anything you wanted to just kind of add or sort of help to frame up the dialogue or the discussion we're going to have?
Not having seen what Luke said in the intro, I don't want to duplicate, but I do want to say hi, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share this exciting work with you. As Luke may have mentioned, I have the huge honor of serving as the Assistant Secretary in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education here in Octay at the Department of Ed. And I joined this administration, this role, because I believe in this power and this fierce urgency of now to really make a big transformative difference in how we center career connection and community connection in education more strongly in the wake of the pandemic, given the many challenges that our employers are facing in filling the skilled talent that they seek and need, and the struggles that so many communities have faced. We really see this as an innovative and important solution to address multiple opportunities that we now face as a nation. So I'm all in on this. The Department of Education, we're partnering with Labor and Commerce, and the White House are all in on this, and we really need our partners in philanthropy to also play complementary roles, which I know many of you already are doing through many different initiatives and bodies of work that you're funding. So I want us to ensure that the sum is greater than, rather the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that together we're really building systems change for lasting impact in this space.
Great. Thanks, Amy. So I want to, as we jump into a conversation, I want to start pretty high level. So we have a benchmarking report that's going to be coming out on June 1st. And as I've been reading through the data and the responses, we can see this shift. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was this sense of four-year college for all students. And as we are now starting to talk about career pathways, thinking about different post-secondary options, there really is this, it feels like we are at a moment. And yet, I think there are folks who would still say, BAs make a difference in lifetime earnings. So how do funders and those who may not be thinking about this every day all the time make sense of that? Is there something that's unique to now about the workforce, about the economy, the labor market, that we need to sort of understand to feel like we can give all students access to high-paying, high-quality jobs, whether they choose to do a four-year BA or not?
So I'll jump in here, Luke, and I'm looking at you. I invite you to jump in too. I feel like there's some myth busting to do, which I assume that the funder community knows well, which is that over half of us with four-year degrees, myself included, have community college credits on our transcripts. That community colleges really are in many ways the center of the career and college pathways universe. And I think about them as, entities that have no wrong doors and no dead ends, right? And so if we're partnering with our community and technical colleges, really looking at the sub-baccalaureate space as the starting place for a first post-secondary credential, or one of many, including registered apprenticeship and four-year degrees, and multiple other options for students post high school to pursue, but really centering on community colleges, that should no means foreclose on their future to continue to pursue four-year degrees and beyond into the future. But the reality of our labor market is, such that our young people today who are in middle and high school classes, as we speak, are likely going to change jobs and change industry sectors multiple times over their lifetime. And so learning is not a linear trajectory anymore. It's not like you go to K-12, you go to college, you start your career, you then pursue your career and grow in it and expand and then retire. It's really an iterative back and forth of lifelong learning integrated with working. And so we really see this as a strategy that ideally could and should build towards four-year degrees for those students who choose to pursue it or who are in career pathways that have career advancement that then allows them to engage in four-year degree pursuit, because four-year degrees are still a very important part of our economy. There's no denying that the more education you have, over one's lifetime, the more income that you make. And that data is still unassailable. That said, we also, as an administration, are really thinking about how we can shift to more skills-based hiring. and thinking about, in the world of post-secondary education, credit for prior learning, credit for prior experiences. How do we really move to more competency-based systems, both in learning and in working settings? And so, I would say, like, our CTE students go on to four-year colleges at the same rate or higher than their non-CTE peers. Our community college students go on to earn four-year degrees. And so it's not that this is limiting options. We see it as a really viable and valuable first step in post-secondary to launch a career, to start earning a living wage, to start closing some of the equity gaps that we see in our data in terms of what we want our students to be able to do to thrive in their communities and have the lives that they seek, and then go on to continue to pursue further education. But Luke, what would you say to that? Anything I missed?
Yeah, so I would add just one thing, and it's really education. First and foremost, it's a lifelong pursuit and it's a journey, as Amy mentioned. But the second is the credentials and experience and degrees that different industries hold as valuable are very different from an industry to industry perspective, right? So I'm going to pick on education as an example. It's greater than 90% of all individuals who move into the education as an industry, they will require a bachelor's degree or higher. The bachelor's degree is the point of entry into the industry. So it's incumbent when we think about career pathways in education that we are really strategically aligning credential, 2-year and 4-year degree programs. And then there are 17 states that are just going gangbuster on apprenticeship as a way to further accelerate that model, which is remarkable. But let's pick on another industry, construction, right? The bulk of jobs in construction, 55%, require some type of post-secondary credential, but not a 4-year degree. Right. So the point of entry for the majority of people in that industry is post-secondary education, sub-baccalaureate. And it's really, really important that we align a student's educational journey with the occupations and industries that they want to enter. The one-size-fit model fits all does not reflect the nature of the different industries that we are seeking to equip young people to enter. And it's really important that we help people to navigate the system more directly so that we are helping that credential or degree attainment happen more quickly, so that we are helping to better connect people with employers and to make sure that those two things happen alongside someone's educational journey, right? So I think it's incumbent on us as educators to ensure that we're helping the young person to establish milestones in their journey that are both strategic, that are both accomplishable, and reflect what their goals are as a learner.
That's great. Thank you. So you mentioned Perkins. FAFSA is, I know, on a lot of our members' minds, right? It's a concern for many folks in terms of it being very long, really onerous, really confusing. So what is the department doing? How are you thinking right now about FAFSA and sort of making that easier? And what are the areas, right? Can FAFSA be used for any kind of post-secondary credential program? Is it still geared towards 4-year colleges? Help us understand a little bit about FAFSA.
So as you may know, the department is working right now on making some significant steps to implement the FAFSA Simplification Act. And we're looking to simplify the FAFSA form. That's a hard acronym for me to say, FAFSA form, and all the financial aid formulas that rely on that. And our goals are to make it simpler, easier, more secure. And our vision is for, many more students from low-income backgrounds to get the financial aid that they need to engage in post-secondary education. So we are in the midst of working on, what this simplification process is. We're estimating that, we'll be able to streamline for, tax information, for example, and have new direct data exchanges. We hope in our approximation that approximately 615,000 students from low-income backgrounds will receive Pell Grant awards, in addition to, those that are currently receiving them, and that we're looking to reduce the number of questions that students and families will need to answer. So we're in the midst of this simplification process. I have to just say, it presents a lot of challenges. This is not exactly in our wheelhouse in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, but we work closely with our colleagues and friends at FSA and in the Office of the Undersecretary overall. And so as we're thinking about like the FAFSA simplification process, I just also want to say that like FSA has been working on a 50-year-old mainframe, and it's increasingly become like just operationally challenging. And so so we're doing a lot of internal improvement processes, like just to make sure that we are updating what we need to be able to be as responsive as possible to students who are seeking federal financial aid. And so we're excited about this. We're hoping to announce the date to launch the new 24-25 FAFSA form soon. So stay tuned for that, and we'll make sure that we alert you to share with your members once that's live. But with respect to FAFSA, yes, it's for federal financial aid for any Title IV eligible program. Luke, is there anything else on FAFSA?
So I would add two things. So the first, as Amy mentioned, I guess three things. Just reinforce Amy's positioning around simplifying the FAFSA for families and students. But the second thing I would add is we really also want to make sure that different consumers and students can use that information to ensure that they have the basic needs that they are afforded to both access and complete college, right? So one example is in March, we issued some guidance around how folks can use data from the FAFSA to apply for public benefits like SNAP. Right, we should make use of the information that we have more strategically to ensure that students have the basic needs supports that are afforded to them, that are required to essentially maintain their lifestyle and their family, and to also complete higher levels of education. And then the other thing that I would add is it's also from the funder's perspective, FAFSA is really important, as many of state and local promise programs are built on top of the FAFSA completion rate. So, many of your states, many of your communities invest in tuition-free community college programs through either a state or local promise program. There are 31 states that do this. There are 400 communities across the country that do this. Almost the majority are built on the back of federal student aid and are offered as kind of last dollar funds. So in order for students to access that type of either local or state funding, they are really working through the FAFSA in order to access that state-based aid or that local-based aid. So again, like your interest in this conversation are really important because FAFSA continues to be one of the principal vehicles to ensure that college remains affordable and that we're casting a much wider net, ensuring that we're coordinating financial resources as well as other forms of public benefits.
So, Luke, I appreciate you bringing it around to funders. And I think the unstated question that I'm going to have at the end of everything I ask is, like, what is the potential role of funders in helping to move this part of the agenda forward? How can they be helpful either at a national level or if they are more state or local kind of funders? What's their role, if any?
So I will say one thing, the department provides regular FAFSA completion data to districts and states just to help identify the students who have not yet completed FAFSA and to promote, FAFSA completion and, increase the likelihood of postsecondary, entrance, ideally persistence and completion as well. And so for this next, 24-25 cycle, Ed we've committed to providing those reports weekly. I think there's a really important role for philanthropy to walk alongside this and think about the local ecosystems that you're funding to ensure that, students do have FAFSA completion as an expectation built into their high school trajectories so that they can become eligible for, federal financial aid. And as Luke said, like, meet a lot of the steps towards local and state funded promise programs by doing so. And so we want to make sure that, on the affordability side, that both we focus on, ensuring that students know about their whole array of post-secondary options, but that then they are indeed able to afford them through federal financial aid means. So thinking about, how you might fund regional intermediaries who are supporting school districts in FAFSA completion, or how you might think about innovations in this space. Are there ways to leverage tech differently? What are the effective practices to promote FAFSA completion among high school students. Feel like there's a lot that we could learn in that space also. Trying to brainstorm, Luke, if there are other ideas on what we would want philanthropy to do to help promote this.
So I think just to Amy's comment, FAFSA completion, I think, is on everyone's radar from the state and local perspective. So, number one thing would be, from my space perspective, or my perspective specifically, would be to work alongside, right, your local education agencies, your community and technical colleges, your state actors, to ensure that there is actually a FAFSA strategy and that people have the information that they need to act. So, like, to Amy's point, right, in the state that I used to work in, Delaware, we had a Getting to Zero campaign where I would literally send FAFSA completion data to every high school in the state on a weekly basis, kind of identifying the young people who have and who have not completed the FAFSA. And the goal of Getting to Zero was just like it sounded. Let's get to zero, where there is not a single young person who has not completed the milestones that they need to effectively transition beyond high school. Right. And I think many different states have many different strategies to do this. But I would say it's working, knowing what that strategy is and knowing how you can further advance that strategy in a way that's complementary.
Yeah, that's a good point, because places have the data, but are they using it? Do they know how to effectively use it and put it into practice to ensure that students really are engaging in the right ways? And then thinking about like the local supports. I don't know if any of you have ever actually walked family members through FAFSA completion, or I'm sure many of us have done it ourselves as well. But many districts and schools like have family nights, and it can be a really challenging experience for many families to undertake this. It can be very personal and emotional too. So thinking about the ways that you're supporting kind of the community-based organizations or the schools themselves to support students and families to engage in this also.
Great, thanks. Just a reminder for those of you on the webinar to drop your questions in the chat, because I've got my list, but that may not be the same as your list. So Luke, in the presentation, it was really exciting to hear about all the different things, right, that the department is hoping young people will have the opportunity to engage in, whether it's career exploration or apprenticeships or work-based learning, et cetera. But I want to start with, what are the things we may need to adjust or take off the table in high school, or make less important, if we're going to make room for this kind of forward-facing kind of opportunity that is more competency-based, that is more about skills, right? That is just, it's a different sphere, a different realm. And I'm curious your thoughts on what might need to be happening in terms of college graduation or high school completion guidelines, the kinds of requirements that we have for students that may deter them from saying, hey, I want to take a semester and do work-based learning, because that might mean one less course that I can take. I don't know if you have any thoughts, and part of it may be drawing from your time at a state agency as well, since I know you care a lot about what it means to go from the federal to the state to the local level.
Yeah, Amy, do you want to go, or do you want me to hop in?
You go first this time. I'll hop in next.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things that I would throw out here. So the first is, learning does not solely occur in school. Learning occurs all the time, everywhere, irregardless of where you find yourself. And if we are not wholly taking advantage of all of the time that young people have to help themselves onto their next stage, right? Like, shame on us. And that includes in-school time, out-of-school time, summer learning, opportunities with family, with faith community, with whoever is in that circle of influence and trust for that young person, right? We need to make sure, to Amy's point, that we're valuing the skills that young people are learning both in school and outside of it, in a way that sets them up along a trajectory. And similar to that, like, learning can and should occur in the workplace, right? So I want everyone to think about, like, the last job interview that you sat in. Very few people ask you where you went to school. They ask you, what do you know and what have you done? And that is rooted in learning that occurs in the workplace. And we have to equip young people with a response to that question. And we have to value the time that they have in a workplace as a learning environment. So those, right, like, if we can just essentially think about the bridge and connection between in-school and out-of-school learning, as well as like how we position kind of work as a place of learning, I think we will create the space and runway that's needed to really equip the next generation.
I would just chime in and say that one of the things that superintendents that we've been talking with who are leading in the career and college pathways space are thinking a lot about is how to build in accountability systems that really value these kinds of experiences so that students and educators aren't inadvertently disincentivized from engaging in them, but rather they're seen as a value add to student learning from an accountability perspective. So learning more about accountability systems, and would love for philanthropy to think about how you can help us all learn about leading innovative accountability systems in that space. And then the other is I was just at a high school in Mesa Public Schools in Arizona last week, where they're working on really taking some of the hard steps towards competency-based education, but also like integrated, cross-disciplinary project-based learning for students that is connected to career pathways. And so I think, just as learning does not take place solely in schools, we really want to think about anytime, anywhere, and how we value students' acquisition of knowledge, but also application of knowledge in real world contexts. So too, like our lives are not siloed by content matter, right? And so thinking about how we can bring together and learn from the field about how they're bringing together new ways of integrating content through new ways of teaching and learning that really break down the business of schooling as we've always known it, like this block is for English language arts, this block is for math, this block is for, instead really think about how students can integrate their knowledge more holistically and connect to community and careers and how they're doing so. That's an ambitious overhaul for reimagining education altogether, and it takes some bold leadership. I know many districts across the country have stepped into that space and have been there for in some cases many years. But I'm encouraged to see this was a large high school of I think 3,800 students looking to do this whole scale for all of its students. So I'm encouraged by seeing some of the innovation that's springing up to reimagine how teaching and learning takes place within schools and how it connects to community and career beyond schools. And then thinking about the accountability systems to really capture student learning and ensure that that students see that. And that said, I will also say one of the things that, I'm sure Luke talked through in our Raise the Bar slides was, ensuring that we have a comprehensive, rigorous, well-rounded education for every student. And that includes extracurriculars. As we're thinking about student mental health, as we're thinking about student family needs all around, we don't want to limit students' abilities to engage in some of the things that help them build their identity and bring them joy, especially post-pandemic. Many of the high school students I talk with, even those that have been assembled by their teachers and leaders to come talk to me about career pathways, I ask them, what makes a difference to you in school? And the first thing almost every single one of them says is community and friends and connection, because so many of every single one of our teenagers today, my daughter included, have been marginalized and isolated through, being at home for several years. And so I don't want to underestimate the value of the extracurriculars and some of the other pieces that form a well-rounded education. And ideally, can also connect students to community and career through that too.
Great, thank you. So I want to build a little bit off this, this image that you are painting of blurring the lines, right, between school happening inside of school, outside of school. But you're also blurring K-12, higher ed, and career and workforce, like labor markets. And resource equity is a really big concern for our members. And it occurs to me that if you stop thinking about these buckets as being wholly distinct, you may start to have more dollars to be able to use for young people's education. So one, does that feel right? And are there ways in which the Department of Education and the federal agencies are starting to think differently about using dollars? And are there states and localities that are starting to have conversations about how we need to rethink buckets of money and make them a little bit more fungible, given that we're trying to blur these distinctions?
I love how you're thinking. Luke and I'll tag team this one also. So the first thing that came to mind when you were describing the blending and blurring of the buckets is that our office administers this really cool program that I feel like is not well known out in the field called Performance Partnerships Pilots, P3. And what it allows for federal grantees to do is to combine federal funds across agencies that are focused on serving mean, it's a term that I don't love, at-risk youth, but, youth who either are disconnected from education or employment and training, or youth who are, frankly, at risk of disconnection. And in a post-pandemic world, like, what youth has not been disconnected, I would argue, but it allows grantees to blend funding from multiple federal sources into one bucket and to determine for themselves the strategies that they need to most effectively serve those youth, and then have a single reporting stream back to the federal government, as opposed to like riding herd on 6, 7, however many different federal strands of funding. So you can think about like what related funds they might have from Health and Human Services or labor or transportation, and really come up with a really innovative kind of comprehensive approach to serving young people. So that's one way that Ed does lean into that space. But with respect to like concretely where we are with career and college pathways, like we are working across multiple funding streams, even in the work that we get to partner with labor on, for example. So we think about what we have in our career and technical education funding through Perkins. We think about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act Title I funds that can serve youth. We think about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act funding that goes towards career and college readiness. We look at like what are the existing kind of formula funds in an ecosystem, and how our partners, across post-secondary and secondary and labor and workforce and employers coming together to set shared goals, so that each investment ultimately ends up having a greater impact than had they been disconnected in practice. And so we really want to put the work of creating these systems of career pathways at the center and ensure that every stakeholder sees value, like a value proposition, and coming to the table and saying, hey, I've got this workforce funding, how might I contribute to this? Because they get something back that's so much bigger because of an integrated strategy and integrated approach. Luke, you did a ton of this work in Delaware. I know you have a lot to say on that front.
Yeah, I would just make a handful of points. So for federal funds, there is substantially more opportunity to braid federal funds than most states and localities take advantage of. And most people default to the position. I mean, most people default to, unless I have express permission to do so, then it is allowed, right? Like, I would encourage you to move beyond. If it's not expressly written that you can't, it's allowed, right? So like there's substantial opportunity to do this at a practitioner level much more aggressively than is done. It just requires coordination amongst people kind of at the state and the local level. That is what it requires, right? So if it's Perkins, if it's WIOA, if it's IDEA, if it's Title IV of WIO, which is Voc Rehab, these are very similar programs in terms of the goals and outcomes that they want for young people and adult learners, right? The same is true with SNAP ENT. It's an employment and training program. It's just administered on the public, health benefits side of our system. Again, the biggest challenge is between federal and state. The bulk of money in education is allocated at the state level, and state funds are far more flexible in terms of how those rules are allocated and where there's flexibility in states as well. So, right, it's just knowing what resources exist where. It's really knowing who to have a conversation with, and then there's more alignment than there's not. It's just having a financial strategy around it.
And Luke, will you say a little bit about the role of philanthropy I'm thinking about
Totally.
Rodell in particular, and how you mobilized philanthropy to support this bigger goal?
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, in Delaware, we had a strategy around college and career pathways that was referred to Delaware Pathways. One of our strategic goals was to strategically braid federal and state resources and then leverage private philanthropy. We thought all three things needed to happen. So first, we thought we needed to use our federal resources differently. Second, we needed to allocate state resources to provide the targeted supports that learners needed. And then third, we needed to ensure that philanthropy was alongside us to make sure that strategic investments were made around research and development, or to plant a seed of an idea that we could later fund through state resources. Like one example is and this is to the question that was asked in the chat, we stood up an intermediary to support employers to engage in work-based learning through philanthropic resources. It was through the New Skills for Youth initiative that later then became a state-funded line item, right? So like there's different ways where philanthropy can be used to provide both the strategic thinking, the strategic capital, and the resources necessary to like move an idea from an idea to an actual thing. And then, right, can be made more whole through other investment vehicles.
I appreciate that really concrete example. And as much as I would love to be on this call for another 30 minutes, we are actually at time. And I was just noticing, but what I'm hearing you saying is that there are ways in which there's technical assistance that needs to be provided and can be provided, but opportunities perhaps for funders to come together with their communities and allow them and facilitate them having the conversations around how to maybe be creative in ways that are different. So I want to thank you both for your time. I want to thank those of you who joined us this afternoon for taking time out of your day. Please know that the video of this webinar is going to be available on our website within a week. So you can check it out at the QR code that you see on your screen. And then we do have some upcoming programs that we'd like to invite you to join us for. We've got the state of research in the out of school time field, the second in a series on playful learning and how funders can embrace playful learning in their cities. And then, as I said, we do have our benchmarking report about the latest trends in education philanthropy released on June 1st. And we have a webinar on June 5th where you can come and hear about the findings. Thank you so much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time.